And welcome back to another episode here at the Culture and Sports Podcast. For those of you new to the show, I'm Wesley Livingston.
I'm Mike Scarmella.
And we are your hosts. And today we're here with another exciting, insightful discussion with our next guest who, she's a Columbia grad, an activist, documentarian. She started her career as a sports writer for the New York Daily News, then working for a time as a producer at ESPN, then going on to join MLB.com, where she would go on to receive an Emmy nominations for the MLB original documentary, Vintage Baseball, also a writer here at cultureandsports.com. Welcome, Sam Marchiano. Welcome, Sam. How are you?
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. You have so many accolades. It was hard for us to say them all. I'm sure there's many more. But as a we
kind of a long career.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing, and a long career in sports, which is even better. I mean, I'm jealous. Not gonna lie. So you were a sports writer. That was the first thing you got into. Can you tell us maybe how you got your love for sports to begin with?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting now looking back on it because at the time I would never have said that this was the case. But my father was a sportscaster for many, many years in New York, and I grew up going to work with him. It seemed like the greatest job in the world. As a kid, I was going to Jets and Giants practices,
oh my God,
and Ranger games, and
wow.
I went to the World Series, I went to the Super Bowl. I could go on and on about all these incredible experiences that I had as a kid. I got to meet Muhammad Ali a couple of times. It was incredible, and I couldn't imagine doing anything else really. I just thought that my father had the best job in the world, and I wanted to do it as well. And to my father's credit, he always brought me to work with him, and he never dissuaded me, because at this time, this is going back a while now, I was a kid in the 1970s, it was fairly unusual for a woman to want to go into sports, but my dad never made me feel that way, and he really encouraged me to pursue my dreams, and so that's what I did.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's amazing. I can't believe. Just so many different sports, so many different opportunities. Is that? Was there a reason? I know from what we've looked up on you that you're a big baseball fan. Was there one experience in general that kind of just pushed you towards loving baseball?
It's interesting because baseball really, from a professional standpoint, as a woman, is one of the most intimidating sports to cover. But I loved it so much as a kid. I think most of my memories and really loving baseball had to do a couple of things. One, I came of age when the Bad News Bears came out. And, I'm familiar with the movie.
Very familiar.
Andy Whirlwick. Yeah, so there was this great, lead female pitcher, and so I saw somebody on the screen that I felt that I could be like, and that was really exciting, and the game was fun to play. Of course, I like many women, I got steered to softball, and I had a very one and done softball career. It was one season, that was it. I wanted to play baseball. But I did fall in love with the game, and I also, something that people don't get to do nowadays, but I would watch after school. There were so many more afternoon games in the playoffs. I remember the ALCS being on and being able to come home from after school and watch games, and I was a latchkey kid in the 70s, so it was really, baseball was my companion in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
So I think that's why, but I really did love, I loved hockey too, and I started my career covering the Islanders, and I loved that sport as well. It was so exciting, especially being at Madison Square Garden as a kid. The energy in the building was just incredible. So I definitely fed off of that, although I didn't really think I had much of a future as a hockey player. And I love the fact that it's such a popular sport for women now. I wish that I had come of age maybe 20 years later.
Yeah, hockey's an an awesome sport. I wish if we had more hockey out here in California, I think I probably would have played. I was a baseball guy too, but I feel like for some reason everybody that I talk to that plays baseball, or even some of the girls that I know that play softball, they're kind of drawn to both sports for some reason. I don't know. I feel like a good athleticism is needed for both of those.
Yeah, what is that? I don't know what that. Maybe it's just the seasons are compatible with one another. Maybe it's that. But
That's true. Yeah.
Now, when seeing that, Major League Baseball was one of the first, leagues to have a professional women's league in it, I'm surprised that it hasn't, continued or been brought back, today. I'm really surprised.
Well,
I know we. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, well, I don't. There's been so much effort. If you get into the history of it, and it's a fascinating history. Really going back to the evolution of the game. I mean, baseball started as a co-ed sport. The earliest references to the game, going back to England in the mid 1700s, women played the game, and they continued to play. To the turn of the century in the U.S. It was only when baseball became more commercial and became a business, women got pushed out, and then very famously, another film reference, A League of Their Own. Women
Great movie.
played during World War II when men were off fighting for the U.S. But I think that, and then what happened was, girls couldn't play softball. It wasn't until 1974 that they actually got the right legally to play, and softball got pumped up for girls, and they were steered towards softball. And then of course, then you had Title IX happen, in the U.S. And then if there are no scholarships available for girls, it depletes the pipeline, because if you're not going to be able to play in college, why play the sport?
Well, it's just kind of interesting to me because you have a lot of male and female like sports in schools, but then you have baseball and softball, which I feel like it's a similar game, but I mean it's also very, very different. I mean, there's guys and girls softball, things like that. So it's interesting how it never. I wonder if it was advertising or something like that just caused them to just push it more towards a male kind of a sport.
Yeah, you would think marketing has a big thing to do with it, and the fact that
Well, you were saying that Spalding had a big push towards like a masculine, type of going towards like a masculine type of a sport, which is interesting how they tried to do that. And you think they could have gotten more out of it if they
and it's hard to convince a girl to go play softball when after you graduate college, where are you supposed to go? Supposed to play for the Olympic team or?
Yeah, well, I think the history part of it's fascinating because it was so, that was the lead up to World War I, and there was a real sense of establishing an American identity, and that identity was very much rooted in a masculine ideal, and you can understand why someone like Spalding, in selling sporting goods, would want to just cull that for as much as possible.
Right.
And at that time, we didn't have the sense of gender equity that we do today. So those things had to be separated in order to sell it. Interestingly enough, now in today's culture and climate, if you look at the sports best positioned to move into the future, they're all the sports that have an equal male-female counterpart.
Mm-hmm. The NBA,
basketball, soccer, tennis, all these sports. It's not, there's no difference between the men's game and the women's game in terms of the game itself.
And they took men's baseball out of the Olympics, didn't they? And does anybody know for sure? They did put it back in. Okay, because I was thinking, I wonder if that might have had anything to do with not having, a female team for it.
And I'm surprised too, because I believe it was Japan who had the first woman to play professional baseball. Yeah. I believe they were the first ones, and I'm just surprised it hasn't carried over. It really doesn't make sense with all the leaps that we made. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say what's about um, it being added to the Olympics is that it's when baseball was put back in, it was okay. We're adding baseball and softball, so just by saying it, it was kind of like, okay, well, these two things are the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Adding both.
Right, and they're
not.
different. They are
Yeah,
different. Like it's
absolutely.
not the same, and it's interesting because I mean they could have men's softball. You know, like they could do. I mean,
100%.
like you know what I'm saying. So like it should not be tied to the same thing. And same thing with scholarships and things like that in college. I think.
100. But that would be the that would be the real game changer in the U.S. is if there were baseball scholarships for women and softball scholarships for men. You know, it should all be equal. So if that happens, I think you would see an enormous change in participation rates because now girls will play in little league and then the numbers drop off when you look at the high school.
Absolutely, because they get drawn towards softball because that's what you do technically is from the norms of that what has been happening. So it's like
where you have a chance to play in college.
Right, right. And it does it's terrible when you have college and then you have the Olympics after that, and that's pretty much it for softball. They don't have a professional, not to my knowledge, a professional softball league yet. Hopefully they will soon, but I'm not sure if they really do. Do you know about that at all?
Not that I'm aware of. I do think that the really interesting thing about baseball is that if you think about any of the major sports, baseball is really the one that's actually best positioned to be a co-ed game. That's how it started,
Yeah.
and it could go back again. And actually, Francis Ford Coppola, the director, is one of the biggest proponents of co-ed baseball and all the possibility that it could hold. And it's so interesting to me that in our minds something like that is almost unthinkable. That could we really have co-ed sports at a high level? The Olympics added a bunch of them recently because they know that's where the mindset of younger people is. But for a lot, just as an organizing principle, it still seems out of the box, and I question why.
And I think it might be like it could be like extremely hard. I mean, especially for me, I'm trying to think of how they would do it because would they have just one co-ed team, or would they have a co-ed team, a guys team, and a girls team? Like how would they want to structure that going forward? Having to deal with giving scholarships, things like that. Do you think they'd have to add a whole nother team, or do you think they would just narrow it down to one team?
It's a good question, and there are definitely smarter minds than mine that can figure something like that out.
That's a typical one. That's going to be yeah.
But I think that it can be. I don't think that accepting, well, it hasn't been done that way, or how do you do it? Because another aspect that gets thrown into this is that there's and this is a topic I teach at the at NYU at the Tisch Institute of Global Sport, and every year for the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years, students, their focus, the things, when I get feedback from them of what they're interested in terms of issues, it always goes transgender athletes are it's what they gravitate towards, what they want to discuss, because there's so much to understand and unpack about this issue. But the transgender athlete actually is a part of this discussion of how binary sports are, because we've decided to classify them based on do you play men's sports or do you play women's sports? And so the transgender athlete kind of upsets that whole apple cart. How do we view this? What's the organizing principle? And I would just suggest that to leadership in sports, that it's time to rethink it. Are there other ways to classify athletes that aren't just based on gender?
Right, and it's hard to think out of the box sometimes because you're put in that box from a certain
Yes.
age, and you're stuck there, and then you got to figure out a way out of it. whether it being, hey, make, one single team, best people make it on the team, or if it's, hey, we want a guys and a girls and a multi-gender team, so yeah, I think it's definitely something, but the hardest part about it is getting somebody to, like, an entire like
culture,
league to adapt to it and to actually to adopt it.
And I feel like we are making steps, and slowly as a society, baseball seems to be coming on a little bit slower than most sports. But in the case we were just talking about in the Olympics, the Caster Semenya case of the transgender athlete, that's a case. And then you just see baseball is always just behind the curve. You have the first openly gay football player coming out, and it seems like always society's changing, but baseball is always just a couple of years or decades behind when it comes to their rule changes. Like their rules are the same
and
rules.
I feel like part of that is just because it's America's pastime and it's super culture, and it's like it was brought up to be that way. I feel like in the beginning, which is
you would think if it's
just,
America's pastime, the women would be
it's the times that that
more
was
equally involved. But yeah, it's just.
I think the biggest driver in that has to do with ownership. If you look at the leagues and you look at the makeup of their owners, because that's really what is that's what leads that's what leads to discussion, and the ownership in baseball is a older, more homogenous crowd. That's slowly changing, but the NBA, for example, it wasn't so valuable to own an NBA franchise not all that long ago. So the infusion of people, you had more diverse ownership, even back in the 50s and 60s, and then when they were having a changeover of ownership, they were really who they brought into the game with an eye towards the future. Baseball didn't have as much of that available, to them, and I think the NFL. Yes, Michael Sam came out, but there was a lot going on, with that situation. That he didn't get to play. He should have. A lot of people say that he should have been drafted higher, and then he didn't play in an NFL game. He was a practice squad player.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's questionable to me just how much. How that shows that that the NFL is evolved. There are other things that might point to their inclusion efforts, but I think it's there's a lot left to be desired, but that's fine.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. There's and like I said, the good thing is things are changing, and we just got to make sure everybody's got to roll with the times, and it's everything's slightly changing, and it's never a bad thing. It's always good. So it's going to be interesting to see where baseball takes it from then. Just hopefully they maybe they look at the NBA or other franchises and just kind of take a look and reestablish themselves in that. But for kind of like I'm just trying to think of the culture in it now. So you have your original, back in the day, you have a totally different culture than it was back then, and I feel like it's a lot to do with the coaches and the players. Do you think there's a specific area where we need to have that leadership?
Well, in terms of, if you're talking about, let's say if we're talking about the LGBTQ issues specifically in men's sports, right? If you're talking about out players, it got better for a brief period of time. It looked like, more players were feeling comfortable, being out. But that's not necessarily so true right now. How many out players are there in men's professional sports?
Couldn't even tell you. Less than a handful.
Right. I don't even know if they're maybe in MLS. I don't. It seemed like it was going in that direction, but then it didn't. So I'm not quite sure how much better it actually is. I think that there's a great show of pride nights, of anti-bullying efforts, of embracing all of the language around diversity and inclusion. But you're not necessarily seeing, um, you don't see out coaches, you don't see out players, and until there's that representation, I don't really know how much better it is. Um, and I think that it's a change. Obviously, it always starts at the top. I think this is an area where culture is actually is ahead of sports. There's that always that question of, is sports the thermometer or the thermostat? And in this case, it's certainly not the thermostat, because I don't think the culture in sports is anywhere near where we are as a society.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you can see progress, and it's good to see in more the progressive areas. And for instance, in recently, Alyssa Naken, I believe,
Yeah.
was introduced into Major League Baseball as the first female coach. So places like that, the cultures and society in certain areas, you could see affecting teams and putting pressure on owners to, make sure they're looking at um, everybody, as candidates, and being inclusion in at all positions. So, it does take areas in societies to, kind of influence these coaches who have also and owners who have been owners and controlling the league for so long.
And going back to
Yes,
the
Melissa, I think you make an important point, because what is true now is that there's recognition of the business imperative, in terms of diversity and inclusion,
Yeah.
and that's new. That's in recent years, and so you are seeing women's coaches in men's sports. You're seeing more opportunities for broadcasters. I was a correspondent for Fox in the '90s, and it was, I know, I very much felt that there was kind of a glass ceiling in terms of the role that the women could play, and now women are doing, certainly play by play seems something that was out of reach, and you're seeing that now.
Hmm.
So the business case, the fact that culture is at a certain point and sports knows that it has to catch up as an industry, is creating more opportunity for women, and that's fantastic. Um, and those are huge steps in the right direction. So hopefully we'll continue to see more of that.
And I almost think that it's moving a little faster than people see. I mean, we see stuff on the news, things like that. We finally get caught up to it. But I wonder how many, like, just we'll say, go back to the NFL, how many players, which they might be openly gay, like, to their teammates, but some people just don't want to make a statement. And I feel like other people, are just, they're comfortable around their team. Like, playing baseball, I had a couple guys that played that were gay, and it's just like, we're, no hiding it, but it's not like they wanted to come out and just and kind of put it out there. So I mean, I'm sure that's going on, and I think that that people are being more respectful, and they're just understanding more that it's kind of a normal thing. It's always been there. It's just people haven't always been saying it.
Yes, absolutely. And there are many players that do feel comfortable being out to the people around them, and not necessarily publicly. And I mean, sports is a great equalizer. So in that sense, that's very positive. But the representation piece, um, more broadly, is just would be so impactful, for so many people, that and I think that there are so many LGBTQ kids who don't feel that sports is for them, or they don't feel comfortable, in participating, and that's a real that is just that's a real shame, and a real disservice to youth across any country.
Yeah.
Especially if they have a passion for the game, like, it's tough when if they have no interest in it, then that is what it is. But if they're like, hey, look, I really want to play baseball, or I want to play football, and they just don't see anybody like them doing it, it could be definitely it could tear you down a little bit.
exactly, exactly, and that's the biggest reason um, why it needs to change.
Agreed. So going forward, do you ever think that there might be a chance to get some women's hardball baseball going?
Um, I have gone through moments when I am optimistic about it, and then I go through moments when I think right now the fact that COVID has impacted athletic budgets
Oh
so
yeah.
much is really that scholarship piece is so important, but it seems farther away um, than it did, pre-pandemic days. Um, that's the piece of it that I think is really tricky. But at the same time, I'm so impressed by millennials, by Gen Z, by the next ones coming up the pipe. That
Yeah.
there's just such a different um, attitude in terms of kind of an activism that I wouldn't put anything past the generations that are out there playing right now. So um, that's what encourages me, the most, and that there are more, that I know that for my generation, um, I was very much a part of a kind of a mindset of you felt very lucky to have the job that you had, and you also felt, I felt, you had to kind of protect that job and be careful because if you lost it, there would be another one. We were kind of, and you didn't really have a network of women. I had a few, but now I think women have, they're just more numbers, and I think that gives rise to bigger voices.
Yeah, and that definitely that'll keep people from doing things right there. I mean, just that having being scared not to not to be able to go like, hey, look, if I lose this or if I look for another opportunity, there's a chance that I won't get this back, and that's terrifying for everybody, but more so in that case for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it never crossed my mind to speak up about anything. Like any issue that I would have as a female reporter was never handled externally. It was all handled internally, and I really, now it's kind of it's a different time, and women can, it's still very 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 difficult. But even, it's interesting. You think of what happened with the Houston Astros and the reporter that was berated or taunted in the clubhouse after they won the NLCS a few years ago. It was another female reporter who wrote the story. Very interesting, and there was a third female reporter there too. So there was just this number. There were a number of people, whereas that had been an isolated situation. I don't know if there had been just one woman in that locker room, if it would have gone down differently.
Yeah, and I haven't really seen so much on that. I'd have to take a look at it more. I wish I could throw in more on that because it's super interesting. But yeah, so what kind of happened with that? Did she get just berated in the room? Was it like a harassment type of deal?
Yeah, what had happened, and this raises one of the most interesting conflicts for women reporters, is that this the 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 Astros had gotten Osuna, their reliever, and he had one of the largest suspensions for domestic violence. The MLB actually has a very good policy with domestic violence because
Yeah.
it was um, jointly bargained with the Players Association and the league. So he got his suspension, and then the Astros picked him up, and this reporter had every time Osuna appeared in a game, this reporter would. I think tweet the domestic abuse hotline telephone number, the local number,
Hmm.
and apparently that didn't sit well with the Astros or with this particular executive on the Astros, and so
Okay.
when the Astros won, this reporter was taunted in the locker room by by the assistant general manager. And another reporter, her name escapes me right now, but she worked for Sports Illustrated. She witnessed this and she wrote about it for Sports Illustrated. And initially, the Astros denied that it took place, and then there were other people who collaborated the account, and it led to the dismissal of this executive.
Hey, well, you know what? If you don't want to get in trouble, don't get in trouble. you know, don't bring it on yourself and then throw it on somebody else and ruin somebody. Because I mean, that's a lot of power that those guys have. So they could totally ruin somebody's life and just say, hey, look, you're no longer invited into the locker room ever, and look, there goes that person's career. And I feel like that's something. I'm sure that you have more, obviously have more experience on me, but so you get invited to these places to go. Do you get invited to go and like do the interviews inside the locker rooms? How does that work?
Yeah, well, you're raising a really interesting point, because this issue of access, and that's especially with domestic violence, which is or sexual violence in general, which is just a very big issue covering professional athletes. And so, as a reporter, and men and women alike have to make the choice of in terms of covering things. Women tend to, with domestic violence stories. It's always this great decision of how voraciously do you pursue coverage, what place does it merit in your coverage, and you are in an environment that you're granted a press credential, you are given access, and that can be revoked at any time. So it can create some real ethical dilemmas about, I last semester I had Julie DeCaro guest lecture one of my classes, and she was a radio personality in Chicago, author and writer, very, very talented person. And she really, there was a domestic violence case with the Chicago Cubs that she reported on pretty intently, and she was then denied access to the team.
Wow.
So it definitely comes at personal risk and sacrifice, for sure.
Well, and then they're molding your stories. It's like, okay, well, now they're molding what you could do and what you can't do, and that's not right, because I mean, reporting is reporting. You report on the facts, and if somebody, if these things happening, like these are things that people want to know, and I mean, it makes it challenging.
And are these some of the things you might have worked on when you were the chair for social responsibility of sports at NYU? Are these some of the topics that would come up, or?
Yeah, I was when we did that conference, which was really terrific, and what was amazing about that was that I was able to led the research on that, and we interviewed 9 professional sports leagues, and which was for our research. And so to really get an understanding of how each league views social responsibility,
Yes.
what it means, how they define it, and how they implement, what they feel their obligation is, and that really focused a lot more on the business imperative. And that piece of it is where you really see the most traction. The reporting, it's important, but it's actually, the internal efforts of the league. Like if you're at a league, you want to create a situation where you're not even dealing with it to begin with.
Exactly.
Right?
You can avoid it.
Yeah. If you're training your personnel well, and you're choosing them well to begin with, then you should really minimize the issues that you have, and you can. There's a lot that can be. People should really, there are a lot of leagues that are very effective at not even having it get out into the public. They handle it internally. So
the NCAA.
So that
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by internally, are they like paying lawyers to keep people quiet, doing that kind of thing on a normal basis? Would you say?
You know, settlements are a part of doing business, but when I think leagues situations that I've heard of where it's handled effectively is peer-to-peer counseling that instead the trainings that they'll do internally if there's an issue, um, let's say if there's a case that a player that there's a system internally where players and coaches will work with the individual who's going through something and because these issues, especially domestic violence, is such a complicated issue.
Yeah.
Um, it doesn't necessarily there doesn't have to be some public flogging of a person or I think that's bad,
Right.
public hanging of a person. That it can be handled in a quiet way and still be effective. So some of those counseling opportunities can be highly effective.
Absolutely. Yeah, I believe that absolutely. Just close one-on-one encounters, the conferences and the meeting with the athletes and the coaches and even the parents. I think making sure parents are getting involved and being aware of,
Guys, yeah, absolutely.
aware of what their kids are going through when they are playing sports. So Sam, what's going on now? What are you working on now? Are you?
I'm very much, I teach tomorrow, so that's very much on my mind. And this semester I'm teaching a course called Ethical Issues in Sport, which is
Well, that fits right in.
Yeah, yes, it does. Yeah, it definitely does. And I'm very much looking forward to class. Although in the world of COVID, it's always a little anxiety producing.
And are you guys in class? Everyone's in class right now?
Yes,
Yeah.
we are live and in person.
That is nice.
Yeah, it is so good because 2.5 hour Zoom calls are they're not the way to learn and
Yeah.
Oh, it's got to be difficult. And do you have all the students on you have the 30 cameras, everybody's on the camera at the same time? That's gonna be so tough if you're not in class.
It's tough on everyone, and in class with masks on um is no great shakes either. I mean,
Yeah.
it's more challenging to teach that way, but hey, I'll absolutely take it. Um, and the thing that I think is exciting about ethical issues in sports is that um, I always tell the students this is that I'm not teaching them ethics. I am teaching them how to create their own ethical framework, and I think that just putting that on the table um, for people who are interested in going into the industry, um, have a decision making process. What are your ethics? Try to figure that out and think on it before you go into the workplace because you will be tested. We all in any industry we are.
Do you believe that makes it more difficult now with athletes getting paid off of their name, image, and likeness?
That'd be for the
That's a
college
good
players,
question.
yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
Is it more difficult for college kids, or is it more difficult for the people who are enticing them?
I would say for the college kids, just also the added pressure and the responsibility of also having their financial future at their hands as well, on top of going to
Yes,
school.
their
and
their
on top
their
of-
opportunity. They could
Yes.
seize it or they could blow it.
Yes,
Right.
so
there.
having that extra mentorship or help along the way.
So maybe they should create you have that that ethics in sports. Maybe they should have your class just mandatory for the guys and girls that are playing sports.
Yeah, that sounds.
Yeah, well, I do think that there is a responsibility and an obligation to to help students navigate, what they're getting into, and be able to navigate the waters and make educated choices. But at least in the U.S., if you can vote, if you can serve your country, I absolutely think that you can. Why is it that an athlete can, I don't know, wash cars, get
Yeah,
paid money to wash cars, but can't, promote the car dealership?
Right.
It's just nonsensical to me.
exactly.
Absolutely. It's all technically a business, and it could teach some of these guys, that business professionalism. Hopefully, it doesn't turn some people into maniacs, which can happen as well. But if they have like the right guidance, especially right now, a lot of these kids like they're gonna need some guidance to figure out how to interpret all this, because it's new, and it's definitely something that's it's just not quite. I feel like it's not quite settled yet.
Yeah.
So there's still a lot of questions.
And to understand that even most athletes go bankrupt after their first couple years. So I mean, the money's not going to be forever, even though it may seem like it will.
Right. So they got to get those ethics in place and kind of understand how to, move forward and take that almost into business and into other things that they do with their lives.
Yeah, and hey, here's the thing too. You're right that there's the wrinkles have to be smoothed out, but the other part of it is that we know what happens in the reverse situation, right? Because that's what we've been living with. We know that people get exploited and taken advantage of, and so. I mean, the proof and the kind of that the old model wasn't working.
Yes, exactly.
Is abundant. So we try something else, and it's going to have to be tinkered with. I mean, quite honestly, I'm way more concerned about the impact that gambling is going to have
Oh yeah.
on sport than I am about name, likeness, and image. I think that we're in the midst of a sea change in that regard that has profound implications on the industry and the people who are fans of sports.
Absolutely. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens. I'm kind of excited just to see and just kind of read about some of the people that are getting paid and how they're doing it, because we don't know really how. I mean, we kind of know how it's going to work, but I mean, at the same time, all this stuff, it'll surprise you.
Yes, yes. But it's good. It's the change is good. I mean, sports has always been a very entrepreneurial field, and it's always been about who's got next. So I think that if staying stagnant it would really, I think, culturally marginalize sports, and so we have to embrace the change, and and that is where good leadership comes in, because you have to navigate those waters, but the games are all about about stepping into the future.
Yeah, and definitely, and I feel like we're definitely on the right path, which is good. I mean, it's slow comings, but we are on our way, I feel like.
Absolutely.
I see you're also. I don't believe we talked about. You're currently outreach director for Athlete Ally.
Yes, Athlete Ally. Yeah, so I was a founding board member of that organization, and then became outreach director for it. Athlete Ally is an organization that works to end homophobia and transphobia, and I really felt that as a woman in sports, I very much leaned into my allies.
Absolutely.
There were a lot of athletes. When I would cover teams, I could think about my first gig covering the Islanders way back for the Daily News. In that locker room at that time, I don't know if this is like ancient names, but there was Brian Trottier, who had been on the Dynasty teams. He was in his last couple of years, and then there was a young player named Pat LaFontaine, who ended up, having great success in the league and was captain of that team. But Pat early on, when I was covering the Islanders, he came to me and he said, if anyone gives you trouble on this team, come to me, talk to me, tell me, I want to know. And that is how I not navigated a lot, was finding the guy in the room who was an ally and would help.
Offered
And
mentorship and
while
support. Yeah.
yeah, and representation is enormous, but so are having allies, and so I really recognize that what I experienced in with regard to gender was the same thing for the LGBTQ community. So if I could provide my allyship and leveraged all the relationships that I had built over decades in the industry, I could help move the needle a little bit, and that's really what we did. You referenced Michael Sam earlier, and that period of time was when you had several players. Jason Collins also came out. There was kind of that feeling that things were going to move a little bit faster than I guess they have, but it was exciting to work with a lot of the leagues, governing entities, very closely with Major League Baseball and the NBA and the NCAA, to help get their trainings and their policies, to be as inclusive and welcoming as they possibly could. So that I'm still a friend of the organization, and they do really great work, and clearly more work needs to be done. So.
Did you notice which leagues kind of were a little bit more resilient to change, or advice from a third party from outside?
I think the leagues themselves, I'll say this across the board, central offices, they recognize the importance of all of this, and the necessity. The implementation typically is more challenging at the team level, but the leadership from whether it was Major League Baseball, I mean the NBA, I think universally industry wide is recognized as for their leadership in this space, and I think that's very deserved. They were very, even if you go back to the 90s, and they were doing trainings about HIV and AIDS way, light years before, and obviously Magic Johnson
Yeah.
created that kind of
Awareness.
Awareness and push, yeah.
for that, because he was HIV positive, but it put them, it kind of charted them just ahead of everybody else, in terms of really realizing what having to treat the whole player, and all the different ways that it was important to kind of prepare players and then provide service to them in all different ways. Now you have rookie symposiums and all of that, but
And what was important? What was important with that is he was such a big person in the game at the time. Like, everybody knew who Magic Johnson was. So having his name behind that, and like having other athletes, where whether it be any type of issue, coming forward, I think it helps people to say, hey, look, like there's people out there that are dealing with issues and certain things, and so I think it's good to get it out there. I mean, it just makes people feel more comfortable, and I mean, just could totally help with just your mental state in the game and all that kind of stuff.
That weight off your shoulders.
Yeah, and and the authenticity of it when a certain issue is, when you have a player that is experiencing whatever it is that, whatever the issue is at hand, or again, I'll go back to the NBA, they've been very good about identifying those opportunities, and then really raising awareness.
Yeah, I feel like they don't wait much. Like usually, if something happens,
No.
they come out fairly quick with it. Whereas every other sport, kind of you hear about it later. So that's where I could see, that the NBA being better at that for sure. Where it's
They realize they'd rather be the first one to spread the news than it coming out.
right,
later,
and it's I mean,
for
that's
some
how it
reason,
should
no
be.
one
I
else
mean,
is catching
get it
on.
out there, and I mean, and it makes people feel more comfortable. I mean, a lot of people are thinking that they're going to catch, slack for a bunch of this stuff, but
Yeah,
they really won't
instead of just
if
getting
you
it
put
out.
it out there.
I think it's also very important that this happens because a lot of really what we're talking about is humanizing athletes, right? To
Exactly.
general public, because these are all the things we're discussing. Are all things that just
Yeah.
we all experience, and anyone
The term "the student athlete" comes,
Yes, yeah, and that humanization, as we now enter into this age of gambling in this country, where I think my biggest concern with it is that the dehumanization of athletes, because of betting on plays and games, all of that, it's just going to be so widespread that really keeping front and center that these are human beings that we're talking about is going to be really quite important.
That's actually really interesting you said that because I wasn't even thinking about it like that. But then you're right because you pull up your FanDuel and it's not a person anymore, but it's a stat,
Yeah.
and it's just like you got to remember that everybody has their everybody's got their own things going on and things like that. Kind of humbles you a little bit.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think it's really the thing we have to watch out for. The most is that we kind of we remember the humanity of it all.
Right. Absolutely. Oh man. Well, it was such a good talk. I can't believe we're already
Yeah, we don't
getting
want
to the end of it.
take up too much of your time. We know you have a class
to prprepare for tomorrow.
tomorrow.
But yeah, no, I this was super interesting. And do you have a website that you want to? Let me see what we got here because I definitely want to put it on here so everybody that's watching can kind of see.
I wish I were that tech engaged, but I really don't. I mean, I'm writing for for your site now, and
Yeah, that
that's
was-
very
Yeah.
So everyone should check out those articles. That's where I would push to.
Exactly, that's what I was gonna say. Thank you so much for the time you put into the Culture and Sports at cultureandsports.com website with your articles, and definitely spending time with us tonight. I know it's late over there. What is it, like 10 over there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Oh my God, the time
I
difference.
recognize it.
Yeah.
It's getting a little late.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
Um,
Well,
What's-
I'm gonna tell you, New York gets sleepy now. It's not really the city that never sleeps anymore.
we're in Southern California. We're out in San Diego, so I mean it's
You've
that.
always been chill.
Yeah. It's anything's good over here. Everything's good over here.
Yeah, no, I'm not used to this. I'm not used to this at all. It's very, we're like the mellow New York now, but it's
Oh, man.
everyone's staying healthy, so that's good.
Good. Well, we thank you so much for coming on, and we hope to talk to you again soon. So thank you
I
so
would
much.
love it. Okay, take care, guys.
You too, Sam.
I hit
Okay.
I hit